have someone start in 1 minute.
When are you starting?
No, I don't want to.
Hi, good to see you.
It'll
Good
be
to see you.
10:50-ish. Yes.
Oh, you did?
I think we're waiting for more people.
Sure.
So how much does the price distribution do?
Well, I mean, you
Because I
guys
think the
had
center of
big
this
terror.
is the report.
Secretaries of State in Rome. And I mean terror.
Right. I'm also
Call with him last night.
yeah.
Something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think ask here what you think.
Well, he wasn't in the
I know.
He
I
probably
know
isn't.
that. Yes.
That's all right. When you
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine, thanks.
so you switch yourself on.
I'm on. I just need to hang it.
Good.
That's your slide? That's your presentation?
And in case of interpretation, it's channel 1. In case, yeah. So when
The slides are not working. Oh, is it working
it
now?
is working now, so you just switch on with this.
So good to see you too.
In case
Until the 15th, and then I go to Max's operation.
channel 1 is in.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
We might be
Are you?
we'll be
Yeah,
very close
yeah.
with Max.
You know, yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll see.
When are you going to go?
Probably the same trip. We'll see.
And I leave Friday morning.
And it
Questions?
Oh, you leave
will
Friday
definitely be
morning.
no
Okay.
time. I think that's
He's here till
foregone
Friday. I think if we went, we'd go
say
with
the
him on
least.
Saturday. You think he's going on Friday morning? TBD.
The earliest was 10:50.
So you're going this order, right? Yes.
Okay.
So
And Paul, as well.
yes.
Paul will come
So
here.
So once you are standing, I'll ask Paul to come into the team. That's okay. You're just going to see.
I was going to sit.
As for the presentation with Eureka, Paul will be also coming up to do the presentation.
Standing?
yeah, it would be fun.
Yeah, he'll stand. That's fine. If you sit, that's fine.
Okay.
You see.
So I don't need to worry about anything?
No, don't. So Paolo, and then video,
Yeah.
and then Joita, and then Paul is gonna come.
Can I have a pen? I think I'm good.
Sorry. So
Nothing's different, right?
Gianlu is here.
Yeah, so thin. We're all pretty thin.
So the two MIT kids.
And I can speak. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to start. Can you please take your seats?
Okay, we're good. Very good morning. Dear Excellencies, delegates and experts, thank you all very much for taking the time to come down here this morning. It's a very important session today that shows what science policy interface in action. Now today we will review what the most up-to-date science is saying about the state of our environment, its impact on human health and society, the effectiveness of policy response, and the prospects for the future if we continue this way or if we change to a more sustainable pathway. We are pleased to see you here in such huge numbers because we have a very powerful story to tell this morning. First, we will review the analysis of the 6th Global Environment Outlook and what this analysis says about the need to change the path that we're on. Now, we will follow this with 2 interactive dialogues on what we can do to help our youth live in a more sustainable world in 2050, and also what we need to do to change our energy, food, and waste systems to address the environmental and health impacts that these produce. To set the stage today, I would like to ask Dr. Jian Liu to provide us with some inspirational remarks on what the future could hold for us if we do decide to take a more sustainable path. Dr. Liu, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. Most welcome to this session on the GEO for today. We'll have in the afternoon the other two reports, the sessions for the global resource outlook and global chemicals outlook. But let me start by, on behalf of the UN Environment Program, by thanking the governments who have been guiding us, supporting us, and throughout the process, and also they are part of the process. And that gives us the sort of political legitimacy, making sure governments take ownership of this product, and government will use it. Let me start from this. And then I would also like to give my special salute to all the scientists led by Professor Paul Atkins and Professor Joyita Gupta. It's a wonderful team composing from both developing and developed world, from the scientists from both worlds. So it's a global, truly global team, and they assessed the state of the environment, the policy effectiveness, and outlooks and options for the future. And they are supported by the literatures that are produced by thousands of scientists worldwide. It's a kind of panorama and a kind of in-depth, hard-working process of the last few years. And also, I appreciate and take note of the presence of the co-chairs of the Science Advisory Group, Dr. Sarah Green from the US and Dr. Nick King from South Africa. And they also gave us the credit for the scientific credibility. Thank you, Sarah, Nick, and your whole team. We have, before this, launched during this UN Environment Assembly, the Frontier Report, which is an annual publication that points to the emerging issues on the environment. And we also launched during the weekend, last weekend, the progress report on the environmental dimensions of SDG indicators. And before that, almost end of last year, we launched the emissions gap report, and which was the sort of fruitful thoughts for the negotiations in the Katowice conference, climate conference. So, and in the afternoon, we're going to also have in-depth sessions for the global resource outlook and global chemicals outlook. Of course, I would mention that the global environment outlook is the flagship product of this organization, recognized by all the governments. But basically, if you add the key messages of all the reports together, and that points to one direction. And that direction is, we need to change. We need to change. We need to change for better, for ourselves, and for the environment, without which we cannot sustain ourselves. It's a very dire situation, and I hope that our experts could speak about the facts and figures right after this. But I must say that if you remember one keyword of this session, and that session is change. We have to change. We have to change for ourselves and for our generations to come. And I also appreciate and take note of the young generation represented by several young colleagues here from different part of the world. And I must say that I am impressed by their presence and the actions that they are taking. They already start taking innovative actions to think about their future, but our future. So in the later today, you will have, my colleagues will introduce the sessions, but basically, I would like to recognize and appreciate their presence. And in this context, I would like to also give them, grant them the award that they well deserve. Pierre, you want to introduce the award? Let me introduce also Dr. Peter Boileau, who is the head of the GEO process, and he's the key person leading through the process in support of the successful publication of this product.
Thank you, Jean. It's very important for us to recognize some special contributions that were made through the publication process. We tried to be very innovative in the process of coming up with the outlooks. What does the future look like, or what will the future hold if we continue on the path that we are on right now? And in doing that, we sought opinions and ideas from a very wide range of people, and we used a platform at MIT to crowdsource that information. And there were two very, very innovative ideas from Dan and Soren, which ended up winning our competition for the most innovative ideas that if we scaled them up to the proper scale, would actually have a significant contribution to making our world a much more sustainable place. So I wanted to ask Dan and Soren to come up, and Jean will provide you with a certificate for the great work that you did.
Thank you.
I would also like to thank their partners, Charles Young and Caleb Wright. Where are they? Please stand up and recognize yourself. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Idol, I would like to invite you also to stage, standing together with Pierre. And I would like to give my special salute to the leadership of the Secretariat, colleagues led by Idol and Pierre, and the whole team. Of course, they are supported fully by the UN Environment team from different regional offices and divisions, basically the whole Secretariat. Of course, the Science Division has the obligation to support everything that they need. So with that, I would like to close my remarks by thanking my colleagues, Pierre and Idol. I think Idol or Pierre, you will tell us what is happening next, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Soren. I'm going to hand back to Nadia, who is our Master of Ceremonies this morning, and she will lead us through the rest of the morning.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Okay, coming up next, we have Dr. Paula Soprano and Professor Yi, who are the co-chairs of the GEO6, and they'll be running us through a presentation on the process, the entire process that they went through to present this incredible document.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I have to switch the micro. It's on? Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, Nadia, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session for the presentation of the GEO6 report. My task today is to introduce an overview of the process. It was a very lengthy process, 4.5 years, for producing this remarkable report, but I will squeeze everything in 5 minutes at the maximum. So, which is to go on. I have sorry?
Just say next slide and
Next slide. Okay. Next slide is due thanks to all the donor countries who made the GEO6 process possible. We will have to thank governments of Norway, in particular, Italy, Mexico, Switzerland, and others, including the European Commission. It was a long journey, and thanks to the generous support of those governments and organizations, it was possible to arrive to this point. The next slide is about the establishment of the advisory bodies that supported the Secretariat and the authors in driving this car. There was in late 2014 an international intergovernmental consultation in Berlin after the decision taken at UNIA in 2013, I think. And upon an intergovernmental nomination process, 2 advisory bodies were established. The high-level intergovernmental stakeholder group, in which I had the honor to co-chair together with my colleague He Wang. A number of authors was also selected, and it took a very complex and lengthy process to put together all these people to guarantee the best scientific support in the making of the report. The next slide is about the process. It is a very long track, and I will stick very, very quickly on the last part. In the last 2 years, the making of the GEO was to have 2 separate review drafts. The first on the state entrance chapters, and the second part upon the outline discussed and proposed and decided by the high-level group and the SAP together on the cross-cutting and policy on the cross-cutting issues and policy efficiency. During the last year of the process, since more or less February last year, the high-level group in particular was tasked to prepare the summary for policymakers. That is an important document because it tries to summarize the huge, important and lengthy content of the main report. The outline was discussed among the HLG members, including with the stakeholders representatives, who I have to say gave an important contribution to the making of the summary. And in particular, we had by the authors, and in particular by the co-chairs of the authors team, Professor Eakins and Professor Gupta, 2 different drafts between May and August last year. And then in September, we prepared the draft that was sent circulated to member countries for comments. In January this year, the summary for policymakers was negotiated in a 4 days meetings gathering some 95 member states delegates, and it was approved. And I have to say that as this negotiating meeting was acting as a subsidiary body for UNIA, I think that the adoption the adoption that was decided there make it as already an agreed document for the next steps. I think that the most important, or at least one of the most important things in the SPM is the call to all the policymakers, governments, but also other policymakers from the business and other civil society groups for urgent, transformative and inclusive action to be taken by every country in the different setting of their own needs. To improve air quality, to improve fresh water, to improve land, to improve biodiversity and all the science-based targets that we have ahead of us. I give now the floor to my co-chair, Yi Wang, that will continue in the presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Followed my co-chair's presentation, it's clear GEO is not only the integrated assessment report, it's a process which facilitates the environment governance at the global level. Which is through a more bottom-up approach. Actually, we start from the regional assessment and to the global assessment, and then synthesize the key message to the SPM. Now, the slides already come out, and this shows how the... I like to
maybe go back one slide, please.
Okay, thank you. It's show the work mechanism to involve some 2,000 peoples directly in the process. The 104, I can read it, 6 others, quality assurance 41, UN reviewers 1,001, and the peer reviewer 1,370. And such a great team was working together at the different stages. And the work normally is under the guidance of 2 advised bodies. One is we call the high-level groups, and another is the science advised panel. And all of this work are all supported by the Secretariat of the UN. And the so slide 7, please. Yeah. Now I'd like to show what is the innovation of the GEO-6 in the theme of the the observation of technology. And sorry, I get confused. It's too much notes here. This slides show a framework of work mechanisms through this process in different dimensions. And I think the key character of this GEO is a series of change. In this slides, is to show a relationship among the approach, method, and the process, demonstrating the full picture of the theory of change. So for whole the slides, overall, the social process has been set up. to form a full framework to establish the community stakeholder based on the institution. And the objective of such a process is to facilitate strategic ways of thinking in the whole process for whole stakeholders. More important for the social process is to help the geo products become a more joint exercise involve all the stakeholders toward the sustainable development rather than just a print report. So the serial change is also demonstrated from this technical analysis method. So we can see the analysis approach. They are more sense and experiment-based. In addition to a national statistic from all our mechanism, our member status, we also focus on the data and research the pure scientific reviewer and also review scientific work, and also the data from new technology like remote sense and GIS also take into the assessment process. I think this helped the report more scientific, credible. And the theory of change is also about two dimensions of cross-cutting. One is about the technical way. It's about the thematic cross together, like water, biodiversity, and also the climate change. And this also another cross-cutting is about a social and a policy. This is I think this how the environment policy or the policy model are formulated. If it's effective, followed with policy effectiveness assessment approach, and design state then defined, and how we could reach the design state. So through such approach, the environmental issues are explained in how, in a way of drawing a clear picture of the reality. The theory of change of geo can be also explained in its community strategy. In the whole process, a field participatory approach was employed, and all the key stakeholders was playing their role in the process to make sure valuable contribution to include the contributor of the large number of the authors and also the review process. So it is a source of change, so the deliverable of the geo is more scientifically credible, legitimacy, highly impact, and the scenario with all the major assessment with a global perspective. So now we have the book, and three such a great reform in terms of change. Geo has become global process of acting toward global environmental governance. So in the process, we the core and important policy questions target and the reach the multi-understand. Now finally we get the graded evaluation of the respective position. So now the book is print, and everybody said the process is not over. It's a new start. From the process, the government knows the weakness of the challenge of the policy and understand how the improve the effectiveness of the policy, and also I think the process can be. It is not the end, it's a new start of the process. So, next one. So actually these new activities has already taken. One is about the relevant to the SDG, and one is about relevant to the climate change. So now I'd like to invite Pierre to give a little detail about these two new activities.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Yi.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
As you can tell, we've been through a very elaborate process to produce this book, but we have also, in parallel, been producing a couple of deeper dives on some of the issues that member states or countries have asked us. The first is, are we making progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, at least the environmental ones? And we have a report that was just released a couple of days ago called Measuring Progress, which which does answer that question, but in a way that tells us that we actually need an awful lot more information to be able to make a full assessment of whether we're making progress. So out of the 93 indicators that were looked at in this report, only 20 were showing progress forward. But many of them, more than 40, did not have enough data to make a judgment. So that's an important learning for us, that we actually need more data, more information to be able to track our progress. And the second product that we are also launching this afternoon is a product that looks at the impact of climate change on the Arctic. In a visual way, it's called the Vital Arctic Graphics publication, and it's a geo product as well. So we've tried to do a deeper dive on that particular issue. And that's a very important issue for us. Climate change in this report essentially runs through the entire report, as do the SDGs, so it's very important for us to be able to do that kind of a deeper dive on that issue. I'd like to hand it back to Nadia for our next panelists.
We have a video now, actually.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and maybe while the video is being set up, I'm pleased to inform you that the report is available online, I think as of now, and hard copies of the report for member states will be available from 2:30 p.m. after the press launch in the central area here, just down the stairs. Our team will be there distributing to heads of delegations. One, we have a hard copy only for heads of delegations from member states. But the report is also available on the UDO platform, meaning you can scroll through it and search for items online. So it's a very accessible app, UN Environment as an app with all scientific publications, where this report will be placed together with all the other reports that have been mentioned today. And when we're ready with the video, this is just a video about the making of the Global Environment Outlook 6.
It has been an ongoing crazy process over the past 3 to 4 years.
I don't know, hundreds of hours.
More than 1,000 reviewers with lots and lots of comments.
On the phone, on the Skype, on the train.
Well, 10 coffees a day.
256 authors from right across the world.
Thousands of emails.
Different academic disciplines, over 100 countries, all coming together for the global environment.
I would say, yes, it's messy, but messy is good.
Geo6 is an assessment of all of the environmental information, the state of the planet. How do we transform ourselves, humanity, in order to stop transforming the planet in a negative way?
Geo6 has 5 main environmental themes. There are many assessments, but this is the only one, not only to cover all those environmental aspects, but to relate them.
It links up environment with health issues, And in that sense, it goes much beyond the previous GEOs.
It's going to be really exciting to see the uptake.
It will be an enormous relief, and I am very proud of the report.
The publication of GEO6 is a beginning, not an end, but it's a beginning of action rather than of writing and thinking.
Okay, coming up next, I'd like to introduce Professor Jyoti Gupta and Professor Paul Eakins, who are the co-chairs of the GEO6, and they are going to present some of the findings of their work over the last couple of years.
Thank you. And now to substance. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul and I proudly present GEO6, Healthy Planet, Healthy People. The sheets, please. So if they can put the sheets on, we could move on to the main messages of our report. We basically have 5 main messages. Could we please have the sheets? Yes. A healthy planet enables healthy humans. The planet is becoming unhealthy. An unhealthy planet affects all our health. The causes need to be addressed. And healthy planet and healthy people are synergistic goals, and we can perhaps combine these goals to solve the world's problems. Next sheet. So basically, if we look at the value of nature, it's invaluable. However, if you try to actually calculate this, it would be more than 100 trillion US dollars. And this valuable nature, it supports 70% of the world's poor to live, eat, and work. And it enables all kinds of economic activity, which leads to global GDP generation. Next sheet. We have 5 drivers in our report. The most common drivers everybody knows are population growth, and perhaps technology. And we've added 2 more drivers in this report. We've added urbanization, and we've added climate change. Let me stop at urbanization. We expect that by 2050, 66% of the world's population will be living in cities. And that's good in a way because it increases the efficiency of the way we use our resources. On the other hand, people in cities use much more resources than people in villages. And another critical challenge is, of course, that 30% of the urban population live in informal settlements, and we need to try and improve those settlements in order to address their health challenges. And in this report, we also see climate change as a driver. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. We know that from 1980 onwards, there's been a sort of a cost of about $300 billion per year to the economy of the globe, and in the $100 billion in the past, and it's going up in the last few years to around $300 billion per year. And essentially what we need to do is to educate people for sustainable development and focus much more on gender equality, and we need to focus on the precautionary principle in relation to the vast number of chemicals that are there in this universe. And this brings me to the cross-cutting issues in this report, and that brings me to the next slide. And if you look at the cross-cutting issues, we have a large number, including health, but here I've just picked a few: chemicals, waste, resource use, energy, and food waste. And just to give a few numbers, there are 100,000 chemicals on the market. And most of these have not been studied for their impacts on the environment or on human health. Just one statistic: a cost of inaction on pesticides for sub-Saharan small farmers could be as much as $90 billion for the period 2015 to 2020. If you look at wastes are increasing globally. On the one hand, causing all kinds of health problems, but on the other hand, we have 1/3 and 2/5 of the global population lacking access to sanitation services and waste disposal facilities, respectively. So basically, we need to recycle our waste, and this market is there. We could generate a market of about $410 billion if we were to recycle these resources effectively. We talk about resource uses. Well, right now we're using 90 billion tons of resources, and of course, high-income countries use significantly more than low-income countries. If you look at energy, we're using 13.5 billion tons of oil equivalent per annum, but at the same time, 1.2 billion people lack energy access, and 2.7 to 3 billion people are still using traditional fuels. And of course, food waste. This is really a problem because 33% of the global food is lost or wasted, and out of this, 56% in the rich countries. And this actually leads to 9% of global greenhouse gases, excluding land use change. So if I move to my next sheet, I'm going to be talking about the state of an unhealthy planet in terms of air, water, land, oceans, and biodiversity. And each of these systems is getting into a more complicated process. Basically, biodiversity and climate change are more or less reaching into positions where they become irreversible, while land, water, and oceans have major impacts also on human health. If I move to my next particular sheet, I can show you that in the red slides, in the red arrows, we're showing you the health of the planet. And there you can see that the biodiversity is worst affected, followed probably by climate change, and followed by the other three. And if you look at the health impacts, then the health impacts are significantly higher in terms of air pollution. And that brings me to my last sheet, which is basically, if you look at the health impacts of an unhealthy planet, well, that's around 25% of all health impacts. And you look at disasters between 2005 to 2015, they killed around 0.7 million people, affected 1.7 billion people, and cost the world around 1.4 trillion US dollars. And in 2016 alone, environmental disasters displaced 26.2 million people, 3 times more than conflict. And air pollution is the #1 cause of environmentally related health cause problems today and leads to probably a loss of around 5 trillion US dollars in welfare losses. And all the other systems have also got huge losses. With that, I pass on to Paul Akins.
Thank you, Joyita. Good morning, friends. And for those of you who like numbers, well, there are lots and lots more of them, and they're sound numbers. But our mandate was not only to generate numbers about what's wrong. Our mandate was also to look in great detail at what governments and businesses and civil society can do about it. So we were asked to look at environmental policy, innovation, which is one of the themes of this Environment Assembly, and effectiveness. There's no magic bullet. There's no single policy out there that's going to solve these problems. But over the last decades, there has been huge policy innovation in terms of invention of new policies, diffusion of policies from one country to another, and a certain amount of the monitoring of effects of these policies. The evaluation of policy effectiveness is more art than science, and it is not often enough undertaken. Environmental objectives cannot be achieved only through environmental policy. And it's critically important that the environmental policymakers here at the Assembly go home and talk to their government colleagues in order to get environment into transport policy, into agriculture policy, into housing policy, and above all into the treasuries and ministries of finance. Policies need to be designed, and the importance of design cannot be overstressed, and involving stakeholders in that design can improve the policy and its acceptance. So in the report, which is a thick book, as you've seen, there are case studies of policy. Back a slide, please. Case studies of policies which look across the 5 big environmental themes and then look specifically across the big systems that are responsible for the majority of environmental impacts: the energy system, the food system, and what we do with our materials in a non-circular economy, and how we might move to a circular economy. Next slide, please. Some very illustrative results, and there's a huge wealth of information there which I commend to your attention. about air and the great progress that has been made on air quality in some places, but as Joyita said, the challenges are still enormous. On biodiversity, it is possible to have a land use for a green economy that does not destroy biodiversity, but we're still a long way from doing that. With regard to the oceans, there's very considerable focus on fisheries, which are a huge source of protein and livelihoods for some of the world's most vulnerable people. Land and soil, the importance of which is obvious to all of humanity and every society, and of course fresh water, which is one of the things about which we can be most concerned in the future. Our conclusions, so consider policy effectiveness at the design stage, establish a baseline, conduct cost-benefit or cost-effectiveness analysis, ensure policy coherence and synergy, engage key actors, identify the indicators, and conduct additional research. It sounds very clear and obvious, but actually, most policies are not implemented like that.
Exactly right.
And if they were, they would be better policies, and they would be more effective policies. So then we looked at where are we going on current trends. And that top bullet point says it all. On current trends, we are not going towards the fulfillment of selected environment-related targets of the SDGs and related multilateral environmental agreements. And that probably relates to the fact, as Pierre said earlier, we lack data actually to know very much where we are going across a lot of these issues. There are 5 sub-bullet points there which I'm going to skip over, but their conclusion is absolutely categoric. We are not going towards the future we want. The future that was agreed by the world's governments in Agenda 2030 in 2015, 4 years ago. As Pierre said, we need to change. Next slide. The good news is, if we change, there are pathways that will bring us to the future we want. We can achieve the sustainability goals, but it will require a portfolio of broad-based measures that incorporates technological improvements and lifestyle changes and localized solutions. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to achieve the environmental targets through consistent policies. And the really good news, if we look across the SDGs, there are more synergies than trade-offs in the actions and policies that we need to follow. So my last slide, the way forward I hope that we will all take forward from this assembly. There is a groundswell of bottom-up evidence. So look at chapter 23 of the report, which has a look at a very small amount of the kind of bottom-up initiatives that are going on around the world that are represented by some of our young people here today and some of our prize winners at MIT that you were introduced to earlier. The transformation to sustainability requires social and technical innovations. We've got to be creative, and we've got to be consistent, and we've got to be determined. These transformations involve those 5 steps: visions, innovation, phasing out of unsustainable practices, policy experimentation, engaging actors and stakeholders. All those 5. The healthy planet is the ultimate foundation for supporting all life forms, including humans. The global health savings, and this is something that speaks particularly to me as an economist, the global health savings of a strategy to reach less than 2 degrees warming by the end of this century are estimated to be more than double the global policy costs. So why aren't we going there? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up, I'd like to invite to take the stage Dr. Bob Watson, who's the co-chair of IPBES, and he's going to share with us some of his key findings and the impacts on biodiversity as well. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. As said, I am the chair of IPBES. I'd like to run through a couple of the key conclusions that we've got from the IPBES assessments. We've so far finished, can I have the next slide? We've finished the pollination assessment, we've finished 4 regional assessments and land degradation and restoration. There's absolutely no doubt that human activities are destroying biodiversity, degrading our ecosystems, causing human-induced climate change, and also leading to land degradation. These are actually environmental issues, but they're far more. They're development issues, they're economic issues, they're social issues, they're moral issues, and they're ethical issues. As you've already heard, most, literally most, of the Aichi biodiversity targets will not be met in any country of the world. We are failing. We're also not on schedule to hit the 1.5 or the 2 degrees Celsius target of the Paris Agreement, and the impacts will most hurt poor people in developing countries. There's almost no question, rather than being on a pathway of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, we're on a pathway of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. The time for action is now. You've just heard it from the GEO report. Basically, all countries need to enact policies to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity, stop and reverse land degradation, and clearly limit climate change, basically. The key message is the IPCC report, the GEO report, the IPBES reports are all totally consistent. And in fact, we all met yesterday, along with the chemicals people, on the sustainable use people, to talk about how can we coordinate our work even more. But the basic message is, from all of these large assessments, all looked at from slightly different angles, is we are destroying the world, we will undermine all of the SDGs, but with action of governments, the private sector, and civil society, we can have a much more sustainable world. I'm now going to show you some of the key results from the 4 regional assessments. There are many common findings from our 4 regional assessments, but clearly there are some differences between Africa and, say, Europe, or between Africa, Latin America, and North America. But there is no question that biodiversity and nature's contribution to people are essential to a good quality of life. They provide food, water, medicines. They regulate climate, air quality, pollination, and they're actually fundamental to social cohesion, mental well-being, sense of place. Biodiversity has significant economic value, both market and non-market, but equally incredible non-economic value, social value. Biodiversity is an asset we need to manage sustainably. Unfortunately, we are losing biodiversity at the genetic, species, and ecosystem level all over the world. Next slide, please. This simply shows you species extinction from the IUCN Red List. Of all species assessed, 20% of all species are threatened with extinction in number in a few decades. And endemic species that only have localized patches, more than 20%, closer to 25% of all endemic species are threatened. Next slide. As I've said, literally all systems, it doesn't matter if they're terrestrial, freshwater, or marine, in all regions of the world, we are degrading them. And one of the reasons is we put nearly all of our emphasis, and it's understandable, to produce food, to produce energy, to produce fiber. And as we've done that, and that's got economic value in markets, but we've undermined our regulating services, we've undermined our social services or our cultural services. The 2 key drivers, really, as we've already heard from the GEO report, is population growth coupled with economic growth means increases in per capita consumption. Urbanization has been brought out very nicely by the GEO report, is a key factor, basically. The next slide. There are clearly synergistic effects. As we've said, the key drivers are fragmentation of ecosystems, overexploitation, invasive alien species, pollution, and climate change. But they all interact with each other, and especially climate exacerbates all of these others. There are some bright spots. We're moving towards the Aichi targets on protected areas. A success? No. Why? Most of the important biodiversity is outside of our protected areas, and most of those protected areas are not well managed, unfortunately. But we are making some progress. We're also making some progress on restoration as well. Given that most biodiversity that we care about, important for ethical reasons, social reasons, and future human well-being, is outside of the protected areas, it means we have to protect biodiversity everywhere. It means we have to integrate concerns about biodiversity in agriculture, in forestry, in transportation, in our cities. So we need to take a much more holistic view of biodiversity. And as said again by Joe, we need to work with ministers from agriculture, water, energy, transportation, and most important, finance ministers that really do control most governments. There is no question that business as usual into the future is not a future we want. In all cases, we will destroy even more biodiversity. We will see even larger changes in climate, and it will undermine our economic growth, it will undermine jobs, livelihood security, affect human health. Next slide, please. Few of the Aichi targets, as I've already been said, will be met. And if we continue to lose biodiversity, change climate, degrade our land, it will undermine literally all of the SDGs in literally all countries. And therefore, as I said earlier, these environmental issues are development issues. We can clearly conserve and sustainable use biodiversity with more multi-sectoral policies, better financing situations, better institutional arrangements, and more inclusive and participatory, polycentric governance systems. We need all actors to be at the table, not just governments. We need the private sector, we need the NGOs. Do we know enough? Yes. There are still scientific uncertainties, but there is absolutely no doubt that we know enough to do a much better job than we're doing to date. Next slide, please. This simply shows you, in Africa, progress towards the Aichi targets. In blue on the right-hand side, they're the ones we're on schedule to meet. Green, we're making progress, but we're not going to get there. Orange and red, we're either not getting there at all, or we're even going backwards. You can see this is not a good situation. There's almost no blue on that slide, and only about 50% is green. Some progress, but clearly we will not be reaching them. So when you think of the post-2020, and I keep hearing all governments want ambitious targets post-2020, and so do we in the academic and science community, why are we failing at this moment in time to meet the current Aichi targets before you negotiate even more ambitious ones? We need to understand why we're failing before we put more targets on the table and potentially fail again. Next slide, please. Land degradation and restoration. Key findings, very straightforward. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, land degradation is occurring virtually everywhere, every ecosystem and in every country. The problem is ongoing and it's worsening. The primary cause, very similar to loss of biodiversity, is overconsumption of ecosystems. And quite often we've decoupled where people eat food and where it's grown. So they don't see the linkage between the production, say, of food or fiber and how it's having degradation in different parts of the world. Land degradation is currently adversely affecting 3.2 billion people around the world, and is, of course, a major factor in the destruction of biodiversity and a major factor in human-induced climate change, basically. But again, like biodiversity generally, like climate change generally, there are ways to move forward, and that's what we need to think about. Restoration is definitely a cost-effective tool when you take it over the life cycle. Next slide, please. Next slide. What we did here, and you can't read it very well, we looked to see with all of the Sustainable Development Goals, how did they relate to biodiversity? And we've plotted out the relationship between nature's contributions to people and the various SDGs, so we know which nature's contributions for people are most important for SDGs. The next slide simply lists poverty is affected by climate change, land degradation, and loss of biodiversity. Hunger, affected by all three. Healthy lives, affected by all three. Infrastructure will no longer be resilient, especially with things like climate change. All of these lead to more inequality. Effectively, the UN SDG said, leave nobody behind. Each of these three so-called environmental issues will absolutely leave poor people behind, without any question. We need to make cities much more sustainable. We need to take action on climate change, land degradation, our oceans, and our terrestrial biosphere. The next slide. This simply showed for land degradation how important were certain goals along the bottom to land degradation. And the result is literally all of the SDGs, to one degree or another, mean we have to deal with land degradation and loss of biodiversity and climate change if we're going to be successful in the SDGs. Next slide. IPBES and IPCC, some of the experts from both, met in Paris last year. And we came up with a series of major conclusions. If we'd have invited at the time, but they were still writing their document, the GO6, they would have come up with the same sort of answers. Climate change and loss of biodiversity, they're inseparable. Scientifically, politically, and from a policy perspective, you cannot look at them separately. There is no question a 2-degree world is worse than a 1.5-degree world. But we're on a course for a 3 or a 4-degree world, which is much, much worse than either 1.5 or 2. If we want to limit to below 2 degrees Celsius, one of the goals of the Paris Agreement, we need really strong greenhouse gas reductions in fossil fuel, and we need to protect the carbon sinks on land. As I've said, we're not on course for the 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. To be on course, governments would have to double, triple, and even quadruple their current pledges, and many countries are not even on course for the current pledges, basically. We said clearly protecting and conserving biodiversity and our ecosystems is absolutely critical to maintain biodiversity and to address climate change. The next slide. Therefore, ecosystem or nature-based approaches are really important for climate change, both for mitigation and for adaptation. We need to invest in ecosystem restoration. We need to look at and how to rehabilitate our degraded agricultural systems. One key message: if we consider bioenergy large scale or bioenergy coupled with carbon capture and storage, we have to be very, very careful. It is the solution largely in the climate debate, but it could have very negative consequences for biodiversity and for food and for water security. So we have to think through very carefully a strategy on bioenergy. Next slide. Therefore, it's obvious, it follows from everything I said, we need an integrated approach to biodiversity and to climate change. And the take-home messages are, we're not on schedule for the 1.5 or 2, but we could do. We do have the technologies. We know what the policy should be. The time is, without any question, now is the time for action. And all of these issues that I've talked about, all of the issues you've heard about from GO6, they're all self-consistent. We're using different ways of looking at these issues. We're using different experts, but in all cases, we are degrading our environment, which is adversely affecting current generation and will affect future generations even more. This is why we're trying to work very closely together between IPCC, IPBES, Geo, the resources panel, the chemicals panel, and we'll work with GBO of the CBD to make sure when we give you scientific information, you know it's not just one of us speaking, it's all of us speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Bob Watson. Technology, if it doesn't work.
It's useless.
Hi. Thank you very much, Dr. Bob Watson. Okay, coming up next, I'd like to welcome on stage fellow UN Goodwill Ambassador, UN Environment Goodwill Ambassador, Lewis Pugh, who's also patron of the ocean. And Lewis always has incredibly inspiring stories to share because he actually gets out there and really gets to see the state of our oceans and how critical the situation is right now. So please welcome on stage, Lewis Pugh.
Nadia, thank you very, very much. You'll probably be able to hear from my accent that I spent some of my childhood growing up in Africa. And one of the things which I love about Africa, one of the many things which I love about Africa is that Africans, they love to tell stories. That's how we've connected since the beginning of time. And so I'm going to take you right now to tell you a story about the North Pole. In 2007, I went to the North Pole. I remember arriving at the North Pole and standing on the edge of the ice and looking out over this icy terrain. In front of me was a large open patch of sea, and the wind was bone-chilling. And then I heard the countdown, 3, 2, 1, and as my coach, David, shouted 1, okay, this thought came into my mind about diving into this Arctic Ocean. I stripped off my thermal gear, he went 1, and I just couldn't dive in, okay? I just couldn't dive in. The thought was, if things go horribly wrong now, how long will it take for my body to sink the 4.5 kilometers to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean? And David grabbed me, he pulled me away from the edge of the ice, and I said to him, I said, David, I said, if things go horribly wrong now, please don't let me do the full kilometer, pull me out after 500 meters. He said to me, he said, Lewis, he said, what are you doing? If you dive into this water now, preparing to swim a kilometer, but also think about the possibility of getting out after halfway, you are going to be confusing your mind because you are thinking thoughts of victory and defeat in your mind at the same time. He said to me, you have seen the Arctic melt. Now is the time to carry your message. There is nothing more powerful than a made-up mind. And so I walked back up to the edge of the ice, I said a short prayer, and then I dived straight into the Arctic Ocean. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to protecting the environment, we have been thinking thoughts of victory and defeat in our minds at the same time. I've now been swimming for 30 years, 32 years, and I just want to take you to a few places to tell you what I'm experiencing right inside the ocean. Let me take you first to the island of Spitsbergen, which is right on the edge of the Arctic ice pack. When I first swam there, the water was 3 degrees centigrade. When I swam there 2 years ago, the water was 10 degrees centigrade. And that's right on the edge of the Arctic ice pack. What is happening now in the Arctic will impact every single person on this planet, every single future generation, and the whole of the animal kingdom. So the water has gone from 3 degrees to 10 degrees in just 12 years. Let me take you from there to Mumbai. Many of you have probably met Afroz Shah. Afroz Shah is a young Indian lawyer who's been doing a beach cleanup in India on a beach called Versova Beach. He invited me to go and meet him. I went there and I simply couldn't believe what I was seeing. The plastic pollution, when he started his cleanup, was literally shoulder height. He's brought in trucks, he's brought in lorries, he's brought in tractors, and over a period of 3 years, he's been cleaning that beach, weekend after weekend with volunteers and volunteers. But still, the ocean is vomiting up more plastic. The birds are eating the plastic and are dying. The fish are eating the plastic and dying. When we eat fish now, we are also eating plastic. Let me take you from Versova Beach south to the Maldives. The Maldives is one of the most incredible places on the planet. The problem is that these are the lowest lying islands in the world. In 2007, I went there to do a swim across the whole country to highlight what was happening to this country. I'll never forget diving in, because when I dived in, the water was 29 degrees centigrade. And it was literally like I was diving onto the set of Nemo. Underneath me are all these beautiful tropical fish, all these different colors. There's a turtle, there's a manta ray, and I'd swim from island to island to island over these beautiful coral reefs. I went back there 2 years ago, and it was like swimming over rubble. The water has risen just a little bit. As a result of that, the coral has died, the fish have disappeared, and that natural protection which those islands have from the storms and from the waves has completely disappeared. Let me take you from the Maldives now all the way down to Antarctica, where I spend a lot of my time, to an island called Deception Island. For those of you who've been to Deception Island, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. This is one of the most special places on this planet. It's a caldera, so it's a volcano which has actually sunk into the sea. So you can actually sail into the volcano. Well, I have never swum inside a volcano before, so as an endurance swimmer, I couldn't help myself. I asked the captain to stop the ship. I got out onto the beach. I walked down the beach into the water, and I started swimming. I will never, ever forget what I actually saw in the water there. Underneath me were hundreds and hundreds of whale bones, rib bones, jaw bones, spine bones, piled so high that sometimes when I took a stroke, I was actually touching those whale bones. 150 years ago, this was the epicenter of the whaling industry. I like to think that those whales whale bones are a permanent reminder of man's potential for folly. But they're not. First we came for the seals and we took all of them. Then we came for the whales and nearly pushed them to the edge of extinction. Now we're coming down to Antarctica to catch a Patagonian toothfish. And in fact, the big industrial fishing fleets are now coming down there to catch the tiniest life on which everything relies, krill. Let me take you from there now to England. Last year, I did a swim along the length of the English Channel. So normally people swim across the English Channel from Dover to Calais. It's 32 kilometers. I wanted to swim the full length to highlight what was happening in my country. I started in Land's End and then swam all the way to Dover. In that swim, which was for 49 days, I saw a few birds. I saw a few dolphins in Lyme Bay. I saw one turtle of Portland and very little else. In 49 days. And on every single beach I went to on the south coast of England, there was plastic pollution. Every single beach. It's like we've hoovered up the fish and we have thrown in the plastic. Which brings me back here to Kenya. I've come here today to thank every single one of you for what you are doing, for producing this amazing report. This is a report which governments simply cannot ignore. And if they do ignore it, they cannot ignore this report. Okay. But now is the time that we need action. Now is the time we actually need to roll up our sleeves and take that action. There are young people with us here today who did not cause this crisis, and yet this will completely shape their lives. Their voices need to be heard and acted upon. Allow me to end off now with one final thought. It's the moments which challenge us the most which define us. We now stand at a monumental moment in the history of our planet. My one message to policymakers is that we need to come together, we need to roll up our sleeves, and then we need to dive in together and without reservation in order to protect our oceans. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much, Lewis. Well, it's been a really insightful a couple of hours this morning, and I feel terrible that I've had to keep you all to such concise timing, given that you have so much to share, and I felt that you were doing some kind of speed race. You did a wonderful job at keeping to time, some of you. Thank you so much. It was really a race, and I'm unfortunate that it had to be so brief. I think, you know, what's really important from all of this that I see is that we really stop working in silos. We really have to stop working in these silos that we've been working in for so many decades and failing. We need to come together and hold hands and look at ways that we can do things in a more collaborative manner. Whether we're scientists, whether we're goodwill ambassadors, whether we're somebody in the media or advertising or science and technology, we need to, instead of having conferences that are set just for these particular topics, we need to come together and have these conferences and have very diverse minds looking at the big issues that we have with the world today. I didn't introduce myself earlier, sorry. My name is Nadia Hutagalung. I am a UN Goodwill Ambassador. I'm half Indonesian, half Australian, based in Singapore, and I've been speaking about environmental issues since the early 90s. And I can safely say that nothing has changed, except for the state of our planet, which has gotten worse and worse and worse. So we have failed. We really have failed. So it's time now to think about not just coming here and picking up this incredible document here and then going back. It's about looking at the key messages. It's about looking at what can I do as an individual, whether it's my job title or not. How can I make a difference? Thank you all so much. We have a video now. Thank you again for our incredible speakers today and panelists. Thank you, Lewis, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. Thank you. Can we get a photo? Maybe we just take a photo.
Hello, everyone. We are going to move to a discussion with the people who will be living in 2050 and with their families and with the consequences of us not acting, potentially. I would like to invite our colleagues who are producing our publication called Geo for Youth. They are in the middle of that process, and they are going to hopefully ask you a few tough questions about how things might change between now and 2050. So Mohsen, please.
Thank you, Pierre.
Hi everyone, ladies and gentlemen, especially young people in the room. Welcome to Science Policy in Action session on expectations of young people from 2050. Now 2050 might seem in the distant future, but it is important to prepare ourselves and face the challenges we face today to be better prepared for tomorrow, which will be shared by not just us, but our future children. And equally important, if I can say, we have less than 4,500 days to achieve the SDGs, so we need to gear up and work towards that. Helping us to set the scene are two young people from Kenya who participated in a Kenya-wide speech competition titled Our Earth in 2050. So please welcome Charlotte Wenger from Alliance Girls High School and Shalok Shahdev from the Premier Academy.
Dear friends, it is an honor to stand before you to speak about something that you and I have a mutual interest in, the future of our Earth. It is a topic that makes my heart throb. Goosebumps come out of nowhere, and sometimes I get really emotional. But I have every right to feel this way, for the future of our Earth involves me and my future children and my children's children. I wish to see a world where people realize the dangerous state our environment is currently in. A world that thrives and strives to maintain a clean environment free from pollution. I long for the day that collective responsibility will flow in every human being's blood. I long for the day that the widespread pollution of our environment will be nothing but history. Environmental pollution is our collective responsibility. Toxic substances in our water sources, our oceans. Realize that I have chosen to use the word our. Yours, mine, our responsibility. Why then do we leave all the work of cleaning up to the environmentalists? Why dump that waste in the oceans in the first place? It may look small and insignificant, but look at it this way. One person does it, then another person does it. We kill our environment and we don't even see it. Change. All we need is a change, ladies and gentlemen. We are the key, no one else. We humans tend to be very unfair to our environment. Our water, for example. The water we drink, the water we use to bathe, the swim water where your goldfish Bob lives in. That water is the source of our lives. From these sources, we live. But in return, we pollute our environment with toxic waste, with fertilizers, microplastics, chemicals. Shame. My biggest fear is that the world's ignorance will continue at the same rate that the global warming will increase. We see more acid rains, and pollution at large will become unstoppable if we don't do anything. But I can see not very far from now a different future, with clean rivers and oceans, lots of vegetation, zero pollution. I know deep down that these things are possible and will one day come to pass. We have faith, we have hope, we have dreams, and we have visions. We have hard work. These are the things that will dig us out of the situation we have gotten ourselves into. Doing little things in a great way. That's how we're going to do it. Plant that one tree, pick up that one plastic bottle. The little things matter. We have the ability. We are capable of building an amazing future. It is time that everyone realizes that the future of our hands, that the future of our earth lies in our hands. To live in a garbage wasteland or a golden garden, choose.
We refer to everything on this planet as Mother Nature. Mother Nature. She's the one that creates everything, from mankind to birds to the fish in the sea. She provides us with everything we need, like fresh air and fresh water, and gives us trees so we can breathe. But Mother, I am so sorry. I am so sorry because I know that we have been too busy concentrating on our own selfish needs that we forgot that you are a living organism too. And if you die, we all die. Please, try to understand, no, we have been cutting down the same trees that give us clean air to breathe at the rate of 40 football fields every minute. But please, try to understand this. If we hadn't done this, we wouldn't have been any richer. Really? I dare you to ask Mother Nature her opinion. She has already given us all the signs. We are having storms that are stronger than ever before, more drought and famine than ever before, more wildfires and acid rain than ever before. But why are we even shocked? Isn't it obvious? A wise man once said, when all the rivers have been dried out and all the trees have been cut down, will man realize that he cannot eat money. See, our Earth in 2050 is going to be hot, crowded, and running out of fuel, unless we act now. Air pollution, contaminated water, and lack of sanitation will only get worse, and our global resources will be strained. Demand for water is projected to grow by 55%. But by then, it is predicted that half of our water will be contaminated, and 40% of our total population will live in water-stressed areas. Global greenhouse gas emissions are projected to massively increase. Will I be forced to drop my kids to school with pollution masks in 2050? And when we are watching The Lion King, my kids will be forced to ask me, Dad, what is that? Because by then, most of the animals will be gone. Lions, gone. Rhinos, gone. Gorillas, polar bears, orangutans, gone. Cheetahs, gone. Elephants, gone. It's really a shame that we forgot that as different as we are, every species is somehow genetically related. No, this will not be humanity's fate. You see, humans are the most intelligent species in the universe. We have created incredible solutions for incredible problems. Our greatest strength is that each and every one of us are different. We all have our own way of thinking, innovatively, clinically, with the power to bring change. I believe in a future where renewable energy is the new normal, where we cut down on fossil fuels and go electric. A future where we really learn to reuse, reduce, and recycle. We need to focus on our Earth before it's too late, because this Earth that gives us everything can also take it away in a blink of an eye. Let us give Mother Nature our full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte and Shalok, for their inspirational remarks. They are the future we want, and it's clear that youth wants change for a healthy planet and healthy people. And for that, we're going to have a small discussion, an interactive leadership dialogue with the people in this room. And I'd like to invite my panelists on the stage. Right, before I introduce the panel, it's only wise if I introduce myself. I'm Mohsen Gul, and I come from Pakistan. I'm a doctoral research fellow at the University of Oxford, working on multi-level environmental governance and young people. Now, joining me today are 4 Geo for Youth authors. Geo for Youth is a document we're producing as young people for other young people to make sense of this heavy technical book with full of jargon words and all, trying to simplify the message and trying to relate, make it more relatable as young people. Joining me are my colleagues and lead authors of different chapters. We have Maria Jesus Eorla from Uruguay, Al-Ananud Al-Katlan from Kuwait, and we have Mandy van den Ende from the Netherlands, and we have Sarah Nevera, who's very local. She's from Kenya. So thank you guys for joining the session. Right, so before we jump into this interactive dialogue, let's set some ground rules. We are really short on time, so it's going to be probably about 25-30 minutes of good discussion. We will I'll request the panel and the participants to not speak for more than 2 minutes at once and give a chance to everyone to fully participate. I'll try my best to let you answer the questions we as a panel have for you or you have for us. Right. Also, how it's going to work is basically that I'm going to pose some questions to the panel and to the audience, but more to you guys, because we here are resource people representing young voices and trying to garner those answers, those hard answers we really want from people who are working in the field at policy level or in programmatic level at different stages. Right, so without further delay, let's go on to our first question. So the 6th Global Environment Outlook report clearly identifies that we have a lot of environmental crises that are apparent and need to be resolved, from biodiversity loss to over-extraction of groundwater, to air and water pollution, to climate change. These are some environmental issues which have exacerbated across the last few decades, and they need to be addressed. Now, before I open the floor for discussion on this, as young people on the panel, what are some of the environmental issues you feel most passionate about or associate most with? Please.
Thank you, Mohsen, and thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to such a beautiful event and to be part of the GEO process. It's really proud for us to be part of it. Well, to address one of the most environmental issues, as my experience with the GEO, and I can't agree more with Louis, that the marine debris, the marine plastic debris, is one of the most important environmental issues that's impacting not only the environment, but also the health. Why? Because the plastic has a long lifespan. We all know that the plastic bottle of water will take about 450 years in the environment before degrading. Just imagine 450 years, how many generations will born, will grow up, will die at the end, and it will remain there witnessing all these life actions. So it's undegradable. It's just break down into smaller pieces. We call it microplastic, consumed by fish, marine organisms, and at the end, it reaches our food table. We consume the plastic. Well, in this case, it's affecting our health, affecting our environment. So that's one of the reasons we would consider it as important environmental issues.
So what I'm concerned most in my country is the biodiversity loss. Currently, 2/3 of the Netherlands is used by agricultural practices, whereas the rest of it is mostly urbanized, which has obviously a large impact on our natural resources. We see huge decline of population of insects, plants, herbs. It's a huge problem. I also see a lot of societal awareness. We really want to change about this huge issue, and I also see and know many farmers that are willing to invest in more sustainable agriculture. They want to integrate nature with their agricultural practices, but they are just constrained currently by low market prices as well as very outdated policies that are still focused on conventional farming, on intensive agriculture. What I would really like to see in the coming years, or preferably as soon as possible, is more innovative policies, more like brave politicians that implement these policies, even if they're not really popular. We really need this at this stage, because this is the only way. If we support these local initiatives, these good initiatives of young farmers to invest in a more sustainable environment in our country, and not only in the Netherlands, in the whole world. This is the only way to enable transitions and real transformational change to happen.
Thank you, Mandy and Alanoud. I guess it's only fair we give a chance to you guys to let us know also what are the environmental issues you're currently working on in individual or organizational capacity. And we would invite industry experts, subject specialists to please come up and share some of the key environmental issues that you're working on, and they may resonate with all the concerns young people have towards environment. So please, we have about 5 minutes to have this discussion. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much for this informative presentation. I'm Bushra Hamid from Sudan, Ministry of Environment and University Lecturer in Environmental Sciences. Yes, the question is that, are we serious or not? This is the question. We know that all the technical aspects are highly analyzed and tackled and studied, and the solutions are available. But the problem is that the implementation is lagging far behind our ambition and what we have to do. So we are speaking about the hegemony and the leadership of the politicians, and they are far away from what we are doing. So it is a proposal that why don't we, the environmentalists, enter into the pathway of the policy so as to achieve implementation. We have to convert ourselves from environmentalists to politicians also. So now we have to declare here the new term of environmental politicians. And this is the whole, the most effective solution for us, which we have to adopt now. And I hope that we would have an outcome by this term. Thank you very much.
Do we have some other hands in the room? Yes, please.
I'm Alex Paulin from Conservation Music. I completely agree about the urgency of the situation, the fact that we need to start taking this seriously. I also agree that, you know, the term of an environmental politician or green politician, I may be misquoting, is very, very important. The political landscape needs to start taking ownership of this, and it has begun to. At the same time, as an artist, I also believe that there's a third approach. So there's the classic carrot or the stick, right? You can incentivize someone. You can give them cash. You can give them tax deductions. You can do things for them, or you can give them the stick. You can send them to prison. You can fine them. A third and key way for us to begin to inspire behavioral change at the political level and the grassroots level is through the emotions. So in collaboration with colleagues such as Ekaditswe from Lesotho, the national youth leader of Conservation Music Lesotho, we're collaborating with musicians to spread information about biodiversity loss, plastic pollution, and what I see to be the grandmother of all issues as climate change, which is worsening and worsened by all of the other issues. We sit here 5 months after the groundbreaking report from the IPCC in October of 2018, which has given us about 11 years. We rounded up to 12. 2030, we're now 11 years away from a major turning point or point of no return. So I think I'm calling upon artists, politicians, industry leaders, and everyone else. Let's not forget about the power of human emotion to inspire action. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. I guess what the key point that's being made here is that these issues are so interconnected, and we rather need a more integrated stakeholder engagement approach to solve them. That takes us to the next finding of the GEO report, which clearly identifies that policy solutions rather should not focus on one or two issues at one time. To have more transformative change, they need to work in more synergy. I think, Maria, when you were working on the GEO report, you were quite passionate about the systems thinking approach. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Yep, of course. Thanks, Mo, for that. I'd love to add on this idea of integration, as we are much dealing with it in our GEO for Youth report. This need of a systemic and integrated approach, which, as Mo said and our previous panelists said, is a key message of the main GEO. But this idea of integration, of how everything is connected and interrelated, it's not something new. We have heard about it for a long, long time. But to address environmental issues, we need to think differently, bring solutions to the table that are born from like a different way of thinking, like a circular way of thinking. But we as young people see to our government institutions, and they are still designed and constructed not to work in a transversal or integrated way. They still work separately. And where is us even most, our most concern, is our education system. We go back to our education system, and it's still so fragmented. The school curricula are still the same that years and years ago. We have geography, we have history, we have math, but they never teach us to think circularly, to think in an integrated way. We grow to be what we learn. If we are like kids, we are taught to think in these separate boxes, how can we expect these kids or us to be coming with this all circular economy way of thinking. So yes, these are our two main concerns. We're really worried about, like, we know we need to think and bring integrated solutions, but our government institutions aren't working integratedly, and our education system, it's still so fragmented. We don't want our kids to go to a school that doesn't teach them to think in an alternative way, let's say.
Yeah. So how do you guys, in the work which you're doing in your workplace or at individual level, trying to cater to this need for integrated approach, or trying to take a more holistic approach in your work? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Teresa Oko from Seeds of Peace Africa International. Seeds of Peace Africa is a non-profit organization, but we deal with peace and development, and in that process we recognize that conflicts that are related to climate change cause disharmony, and especially to young people and children who are the future generation. One way in which we are trying to address the issue is through education, working with schools, especially that surround natural resources, and our approach is sports. We use sports as a tool for development, where we we integrate experiential learning during the sporting activities to create awareness and conversations around the environment and environmental conservation. And this has enabled young children and young people to come up more often, influence their parents, influence their communities around, to be able to take seriously environmental issues. Thank you.
Yes, please.
So when we talk about environmental consciousness, we have to start from the young, and that's pretty obvious. So what we've done in India is that I've written these 27 songs for children, which are based on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And in the 2019 curriculum, in the educational curriculum in India, in 2019, it's being distributed in more than 11 million textbooks. And starting 2020, we are going to be going into 20 million textbooks. So the idea is that start the conversation early, teach them through a language and a platform that that children would enjoy, that is through songs, and change the current scheme of nursery rhymes. Like Baba Black Sheep does not teach you anything about sheep. Twinkle Twinkle Little Star does not teach you anything about stars. But you know, it would be great to start the conversation early through sustainable, through nursery rhymes. Yeah.
Well, that's a very innovative idea. Congratulations. Do we have? Yeah. Yes, please, Charles.
So my name is Charles Mwangi. I am involved in the GLOW program, which is an environmental educational program. Again, we still play an important role. Our program is involved in environmental education because we want to teach the young people who are in primary schools and secondary schools about environmental issues. Because when they experience, they are able to articulate in a better way. And as we have these discussions, my challenge will be, I'm also involved, I'm one of the elders of the main GEO report, and also involved in the GEO for Youth report. But my concern is the role of the youth within such forum, because I have attended the Science Business Forum sessions. I've also attended the UNEA, the one that is currently ongoing. But my concern is we do not have quite a number of young people being represented in these forums, and the issues that we are discussing affects them. So my request will be to have more young representation so that they have a better understanding of the processes that are going on. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. I agree that youth needs to be included in decision-making processes far more than what they've been, to what extent they've been involved until now. I think one key theme that has come so far is around environmental education and the need to make sure that the current and future generations are aware of the environmental issues that we face today, and so they're well prepared to take action for that. I think along with education, what is rapidly changing is the skill set required for employment in the next couple of years and so forth. For example, the World Economic Forum has identified changing skill sets required by the year 2030 and beyond. So we have to, when we're thinking about the education system, we also equally have to think about how we could create better employment opportunities for young people. And green jobs is usually the solution that is provided. I think it's only fair to ask young people who know best what job opportunities could work for them. So how could you think that current jobs could be made greener for you and the future generations?
Thank you, Mo. I think the careers that we are deciding to take up today are the most important in achieving a healthy planet and a healthy people. And a young person starts deciding about their career as early as 5 years, but the usual business as usual scenario will not lead us to a healthy planet. And so it's upon us to actually bring that change and paradigm shift to ensure that the career decisions we are making right now will impact 2050 and will ensure that we achieve a healthy planet and a healthy people. It is the most important decision for young people, but at the moment we are finding that the transition from school into the world of jobs is not very clear, and we are also not sure what we are supposed to do. And we find that the skills that we require to actually achieve a sustainable economy are lacking, and we have to also start doing other certification courses that are actually more time-consuming and expensive. And I feel that it's time we put more effort into linking what we study in school, and so that it continues all the way into how we contribute into the world of jobs. And that will include resource efficiency, as well as using low resources. And also it will include other skills like renewable energy. These skills are not taught in school. So we find that when we transition or when we graduate from school, then someone starts asking, how do I contribute to a green economy? How do I contribute to a sustainable economy? And then there's that lack. And at the moment, what is being taught in school is if I want to do a sustainable career, then I have to go into the environmental courses. But then in the world of market, an environmentalist has to work with an engineer, an architect, a doctor, a lawyer. Wouldn't it be possible to actually integrate all these courses to ensure that every student who graduates from school actually knows that environmental resources and sustainable use of our resources is actually a basic education, so that when we are planning our cities as architects and city planners, we are able to ensure that we use the resources we have sustainably. When I'm a doctor, I'm able to ensure that I become a green doctor, I become a green lawyer, I become a green judge. And so all of us, everyone, wherever we are contributing to a sustainable economy.
Sure, thank you. I think it's clearly visible that there is a white space now, and that calls for a lot of innovation and research, and you could be piloting new schemes and trying and testing best solutions. So how are people in the industry of the sector trying to engage with young people and creating future job opportunities for them and trying to make them more sustainable? Well, it's a tough question, but any thoughts on how could these jobs be made greener? Well, I, for one, can say that it's, as Sarah said, that we need to acknowledge the multidisciplinary nature of sustainable development. The very problem of solving sustainable development is the umbrella term itself, and it has so many facets in it that it's difficult to start somewhere. So we have to start thinking in a more integrated manner. Yes, please. Yeah.
I would like to add something. It's about the green jobs. What's the problem or the challenge about the green job is, are they exist all over the world? I met several young people from different countries. Some of them have no idea what is the green job is, and the other, they don't know how to get an access to these green jobs. I think the main issues here is to highlight, to identify the green jobs at the first place before providing the opportunity.
Can we say that all jobs can be green?
That's what we are actually trying to really put forward in our Geo for Youth report. Sarah mentioned it a bit. It doesn't matter you're a doctor, you're an architect, you're a musician, doesn't matter what you are. You have to find your passion and then try to make with that career path an environmental path. Trying to be a green architect, a green doctor, or a musician that inspires in a green way. So any career can actually be green, and we're really trying to put that message forward. But what we are struggling as young people now, you do a career in environment or just architecture, is to find then meaningful jobs. Those who want to do a sustainable career usually turn to be entrepreneurials. We see the youth champs that are most of the entrepreneurials. We don't find meaningful jobs in our government ministries of environment so that's what we are struggling sometimes, to find meaningful jobs, positions.
I think what's clearly visible through whatever we've talked so far is that I think we're going towards 3 E's here: education, employment, and possibly engagement. This move towards changing your lifestyle, right? And we're seeing young people all across the globe trying to change this demand and supply balance and demanding more sustainable products you can see this switch from fast fashion to slow fashion, or concerns or movements like the climate march and all. So young people really have the capacity to maneuver wherever the demand cycle goes. But from your experience, what do you think, is the demand being catered to? Is the voice being heard?
Yes, our voice is being heard, but at the same time, it's heard slowly, or the rate at which we are trying to implement this is very slow, such that we will not get there. And for us, as young people, we get anxious when we see these assessments saying that we might not get there, and at the rate of which we are implementing this is quite slow. So we feel there's a need to actually make it wholesome and make it integrated, so that every activity that the young people are doing is amplified to ensure that it contributes to the global economy. And they're not only small-scale activities or individual activities that we take up, but these activities collectively are amplified by the policies that that are put in place, and the policies that are also supporting us should be able to amplify these activities so that they balance the demand and the supply, and for us to be able to achieve this big.
I think it all goes together. For example, if we have new things like, instead of a black sheep, we have something around environment and sustainability. People will gradually start thinking towards how they're better able to create that demand. And then industry leaders and subject specialists need to push that agenda, which the young people are now trying to bring it up and surface to all of you, that it is important that we rethink our approaches of the current landscape and how we are trying to deal with issues. Clearly, it's not working, so things have to change at a faster pace. And one thing about young people is we have great potential, which could be harnessed if you work on the same pace as us. So we have to fasten our pace in order to achieve the SDGs and whatever comes later around sustainable development by the year 2050. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm from Pakistan. I was, listening to the debate.
Someone from Pakistan.
Yes, it was, the debate is very interesting. I'll just add a few things. First is, it's actually, whatever is being discussed, it actually is part of the sustainable consumption and production agenda. Now, no progress can be made without, number one, a proper SCP agenda, which fits into the short, medium, and long-term plans of a government. And before that, the ownership of member states is the most important thing. Now, ownership obviously comes through various advocacies and various other measures, but it is also the realization by the governments to go ahead with it. Now, in Pakistan, we have developed a plan with the assistance of the UN Environment, and we're going ahead with that. I'll not elaborate on that, but just to mention that Pakistan is actually sensitized to this, and we are going ahead with the SCP agenda. Green jobs are expensive. All of us know this. And they also do not generally fit in the profit-oriented paradigm of every production sector industry. So until and unless it is ownership by the government, plans in the short, medium, long term, and thereafter, in case of countries which do not have resources as much as others, assistance by the global community. Otherwise, it is not possible to achieve either green jobs for the youth, to engage them, and then achieve this sustainability. Now, being from Pakistan, you must be knowing about the billion tree tsunami, in which Pakistan became one of the regions in Pakistan became the first sub-region to actually meet the bond challenge, and the forest cover was increased by 4.5%. And that 4.5% increase in the forest, planting of 1.2 billion trees, which is now being upscaled to 10 billion, will create green jobs. A lot of green jobs, not a few, but quite a few 100,000. So that is how the government should engage and move forward in this.
Clearly,
thank you.
As we said, all jobs could be made greener, and we have to just rethink the way we currently offer employment opportunities and come up with better strategies to do that. I could take one more comment just for a minute, if someone wants to. Oh, yes, please.
Hello again. Just to follow up to sort of multiple things that I've heard during this little piece of are we being heard? You know, we actually, you know, speaking of Baba Black Sheep, in Zambia just a few months ago, we put out a song called Samalilani. This means preserve. That song went viral. Not just in the youth, but across the country. It comes on, the music video comes on after the daily news every day. It's on the radio all the time. But through all of this, actually, we're now discussing a partnership with the Central Bank of Zambia, who now, they've developed a green policy, and they're interested in sort of being a shining light or a beacon or an example or role model for other financial institutions who, as we know, I mean, the way I put it, the banks hold the keys to daddy's Corvette. And if they're funding polluting industries or other industries that are not sustainable, you know, they actually have some of that responsibility. They also have the ability to respond by denying them those funds. So I think the young people are being heard in creative ways, and even upper echelons of the private and financial sector are starting to become ready to hear. And so if we use the right voice and if we're creative and motivated enough, I think we can form these kind of partnerships.
Thank you. We're over time, so we have to stop
Yeah,
there.
just 1 second.
Yes, please.
I think that's a clear example of when the youth is being trusted, because sometimes we feel that we are not being trusted. We come with innovative ideas, but then we are constrained and we go like, no, you do have to do your PhD dissertation like this way. No, but I have a super idea to make it this way. No, do it like that.
Yes.
But that's a clear way that they are trusting the youth.
We always need like 3 or 4 years experience after being graduated from a Master's Sustainable Development or something related. It doesn't make sense to have 3 years experience if we like just enter the job market. So we clearly can use much of those youth potential in a much better way, much more efficient way.
Well, there's a lot of food for thought to take away. I'm sorry we're over time, but you can have more discussion over the lunch break. I would like to thank the panelists and all the audience members who contributed to this discussion. I would like to end today's session by really reinforcing that it's important to engage young people in creative, innovative ways and help us make you take decisions for us and the future, and we are there and we're available. And one last thing to say before Pierre throws me off the stage: we matter equally, not if only or as long as we matter. Full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohsen. Thank you, Maria Jesus, Alanud, Sarah, Mandy. So we are going to finish off the morning with this concept of systemic policy approaches. We want to move into a direction where we actually speak about changing large systems that have significant environmental, economic, and social impacts so that they have the same sort of economic and social benefits as they had in 2050, but they have much less environmental impact. So our goal here is to try and give you a sense of how that might happen. And we have some guests that I will let Joita introduce, who will be our moderator. Maybe I'll start with just Adrian. Adrian Vandernap from the World Food Programme is with us today. We have Birgi. I don't know where Birgi is. Okay. All right. Birgi is a waste expert from UN Environment. And Mar Viana Rodriguez, who is coming to us from Spain to speak about air quality and energy. So if I could invite you all up to the panel. Thank you.
It's on.
We need to fit you with microphones so that...
Yeah, it's on.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. This panel is going to be about the health and environmental impacts of energy, food, and waste. Three very, very important aspects of our daily life. Let's just simply go back and look at energy. If you use fossil fuels, you have urban air pollution, you have rural household air pollution, and of course, you have climate change. If you look at biodiversity, then of course, the loss of biodiversity is being caused primarily by the food systems of the world. So the food systems become a really important part of the story. And of course, with food issues, we need to look at how does the biodiversity loss affect food, but also perhaps how do our eating habits affect the production systems? How do production processes affect our eating habits? And how much food do we actually waste? If you look at the global statistics, it's quite frightening that 56% of the global food waste takes place in the rich countries. And a substantial amount also takes place in the poor countries. And then we look at waste, something we all throw out every day, and we spend a lot of time with it. Now, we have three panelists here who are going to also answer all your questions. So that's going to be an interesting challenge.
Can you do that?
But perhaps we could just start with a quick round with a minute each, and I will ask Birgi, do we want to say something to us about the waste system that you think is really important?
Yeah, thank you. I think when you say waste system, we need to think about the categories sometimes. The solid waste, sometimes we put a lot of emphasis on that. We generate them. We generate plastic. We generate also other litters. We generate sometimes some solid waste where we don't even know where to dispose them. So we end up doing some dumping on some site or some burning, and we link it to the gases waste, which is the air pollution, because when you burn, it goes there. When you dump, we also pollute the soil. And then it can leak into another stream of waste, which is the liquid waste. And we call it for some time wastewater. It could be also some many kind of distinction between this waste. So, and each of these subcategory of waste, solid, gaseous, or liquid, need really to be handled very differently because all of them impact the soil, the water, the air, and the environmental in which we live. So, yeah, that's what I want.
And I don't know whether you all know, but around 6 kilos of electronic waste are thrown by each one of us every year. Now, that's a bit frightening. What about you, Adrian? Would you like to tell us a little bit about food security issues, a key message that you have?
Well, I have 20 key messages. Is
Ah,
that okay?
pick one.
You know, I'm already a bit depressed about this book, you know, that's what is coming up. No, I just want to share with you a few thoughts on food systems, etc. Well, clearly we have a big problem because, first of all, the food is not good enough. We have a lack of nutrients in actually everywhere in the world, so we need better food for healthy growth, including the brain. So we need more, and while we're getting more people who expectedly will eat more, because we want them to go up in life, so they will probably eat more. So we're running out of land also, and we're running out of water. I saw that on some of the slides. I'm sure there is a very depressive part in the book about that. So we're running out of land, we're running out of water. We have also a money problem, because the producers complain that the prices are not high enough, so then they produce a lot of rubbish food, and the consumers complain that the prices are too high, and a large part of their income has to be spent on food, so they go for the cheaper food, not necessarily the food that they should eat. We have also a problem with transport, because there's more emissions, we need more trucks, we need more roads, because those trucks destroy the road, etc., etc. You sort of cycle.
Are you saying we should grow our own food?
I think we should do something differently. Yeah?
Okay.
Now let's look at the opportunities. So let's go back to the future. We talk here about agriculture. So the future of agriculture, when did it start? In the Western Hemisphere, it started in what is now the Iraq area, so to say. And maybe you heard about the myth of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. I think these were not hanging gardens. I think these were farms. Why? Because that's where agriculture started. Why would you grow horizontally and not vertically? Because already by then, the climate was very dry. They had to pump up water, and they have those nice rivers there. They probably used animal traction. So if you have to irrigate, so if you have to pump water, why horizontally and not vertically? So I have this thing, is maybe this, in the myth, we talk about the hanging gardens because the princess was homesick, etc. I think they were hanging farms, actually. So we should look at agriculture, but also at transport totally differently, because otherwise I don't think we're going to solve those problems.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to you. And Mario, will you tell us a little bit about air pollution and what you think is key message? Or pick the topic that you want to give a message on.
No, sure. Thank you. I think from the air pollution point of view, it feels like the message has been out for a very long time. We know that we have problems in air pollution, especially in cities. You described earlier how it is the main environmental contributor to the global burden of disease, with 7 million people dying prematurely every year. So we know we have this problem, which is focusing mainly in the cities, also because the cities are going to be concentrating more and more people in the near future, and then also in the rural areas where people are consuming solid fuels. So it's a problem that's been there for a long time. The good thing is that we have the solutions as well. We have policies that have worked and regulations that have worked, but they're not sufficient. So we need to look for additional tools, also a strong emphasis on behavioral change. We know that we can reduce, especially from the energy sector, from transport, and this should be the way we go forward. The question is how to implement these changes on a larger scale.
Thank you. So let's just look at it personally. If you had to integrate the food system, the waste system, and the air pollution system within your own lives, because that's the best place to integrate it, could you do it? Would anybody like to ask a question on that or try to come up with an idea? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much for these good ideas, and I think that economic is a very major driver in the implementation of so much ideas and environment-friendly ideas and principles, especially for developing countries and low-income countries. So I think that the ideas are available and so on. So we have also to add the economic dimension and the economics of the environment. And this issue, I think that is not hammered much on. So if you could hammer, yes, of course, it's not the only and the sole driver, but I think that it is an influential driver for the developing countries which constitute the majority.
One second. Are you saying that the economic growth pursuit is the challenge, or are you saying that developing countries need to first grow and then they can focus on it? What exactly is your question?
Developed countries should have more concentration in financial support so as to achieve this, and also they have to improve their economies. Poverty is a major driver for the destruction of the environment. So we have to make an economic formula which affects this concept.
Okay, so I was talking about what can we as an individual do to integrate, and you went to the global level, and in your global question you're saying that the developed countries have a bigger responsibility. Okay, so let me take that point, your point, on and go on to Delphine. What do you want to add?
Hi, I'm Delphine Levy-Alvarez. I work at Zero Waste Europe and coordinate the Break from Plastic movement in Europe. So it's always interesting to come from a personal point of view, but then I think we have to go quickly at a community level and then more global.
And
but
I would, to his question.
yeah, but I would say that at a personal level, something that can be done is experiencing a zero waste lifestyle, because by doing so, you are basically reducing your waste at the minimum, so it has an impact on how much resources we're consuming, it has an impact on how much waste we're burning or landfilling, so it reduces air pollution as well.
So let me just hold the thought. So she's suggesting a zero-based lifestyle, which probably can only be zero-waste lifestyle, which is probably something that we want to apply to the rich people of the world.
Absolutely not. Can
You
I finish
want
my...
all the poor people to live a zero-waste lifestyle.
Yeah, can I finish my point?
Okay.
Because the last point was about food, because what we know in the zero-waste lifestyle systems, which actually a lot of people all over the world are experimenting, and not only rich people and not only in the global north, it's also that you are consuming food differently. You are consuming more local food because you're buying things without packaging, where you're going to the local market, you're going directly to the farm. And this is not a rich people concept. We have colleagues all over the world, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in South Africa, in Latin America, that are living a zero-waste lifestyle and adapting what it means to the regional context. So it encapsulates the three different dimensions that our speakers talked about, and it's an individual system that has to be facilitated by policies and by business offer in order to have reusable products, in order to have places where you can actually consume this kind of food.
Okay, so zero waste lifestyle and more unpack less, peel more. That's the narrative of Eat Local. Because if you have to pack, you have to, well, that's what's been discussed during this week over here. But you didn't come back to his question, and I'm going to try to bring it down a little bit. If you live in an urban slum, and you have not much resources, and you're living on the dump, how do you get to a zero-waste lifestyle?
So actually in the Philippines, our colleagues are working with people in the slums. There is a place called Smoky Mountain, and those people are living out of what they get from the waste, but they are working with them on their own consumption, because what we see in developing countries is the issue with the sachets. A lot of the products are taken to the consumer in those small format multi-layer sachets that you can't collect, you can't recycle. So they're working to provide an offer, like with dispensers of shampoo, dispensers of like all these products that you can find in those sachets, but providing an alternative solution. And the objective is actually to take people out of the landfill and turn them into waste collectors, like door-to-door waste collectors, but not having them living on the landfill anymore, because we reduce what comes in the landfill.
So her point is zero waste lifestyle, be local, buy local, but his question about the North-South relations is still hanging. Does anybody else want to come up and suggest something? Yes, please, Charles.
I would want to propose that, because for you to be able to know there is a problem, you have to be sensitized, you have to be educated that it exists. Issues of food waste might not be in the curriculum, and my proposal will be to have a curriculum within schools that evolves depending on the challenges, so that when you're going through an educational system, you're being exposed to the challenges that are there, so that now you're able also to be told how can you solve them, or you explore possibilities or alternatives
Won't that
that you
take
can
20 years to take effect? Would that be too late?
I think we have players within the industry who are working with children in different categories. Myself, I work with children in environmental education, and these are components that can also be built up on extracurricular activities or clubs where kids are exposed to what is happening within the world.
All right, so we have the nursery rhymes that were brought up earlier, and now education for sustainable development. Yes, please?
I just had a comment to make, because when we talk about the individual level, like for example in the city that I live in, Bangalore in India, and a couple of other cities, there is no proper waste management done on the government level. So even if we separate our trash and we have different bins, half an hour after we give it, half an hour after the trash is collected, it's mixed back again, and then maybe about 2 kilometers down the line, it's burnt basically. So no matter how conscious the society is, if there is nothing done at an institutional and at a policy level, then whatever we do is absolutely wasted. And yeah.
And in fact, even in the Western world, they collect all the plastic, but very often they don't know what to do with it. And I believe that the plastic ends up in the developing world after that.
Correct.
So I think the point that you raise is the role of the state. Should the role of the state be a leader in changing the way people behave? But you can pick any question that you heard from here or from other speakers. Anybody else? Come along, this is supposed to be a fun session, and can I then start to do, yes, Nicholas?
Thanks, and thanks, esteemed panel. So I was in a session yesterday or before that where a very interesting point was made. It's like, let's stop focusing on waste and let's focus on the wasters. And that means, where does the waste originate from? And one of that is to push back really hard against the manufacturers and say every bit of packaging that they produce, they should have to take back. Now, obviously, that's not going to solve things 100%, and they can't take back 100% of stuff and so on. But it certainly would start solving things, or help solve things at source, rather than trying to deal with it at the end of the line, essentially.
Okay, but can we do that as individuals? Do we need state leadership on this? I'll come back to you, but I'm hoping to mobilize more people in the audience. Perhaps one of you? Yes?
I think that waste doesn't have to include the whole state. It can be county-based, district-based. It could be created by the community, like community-based waste management, such as taking human waste and making centers that create biogas for the local community.
And so you want the local people to themselves do it?
I think that is a possibility. And then the state can be a catalyzer for such local action as well. And these examples have existed around the world already.
So you're focusing on the local. Would any of you want to add something there?
Sure. I know we talked about the role of the state, and undoubtedly that does have an important role, but going back to kind of the role of the individual, I think maybe one unifying theme for all these different subjects we're talking about is simply the idea we should all just use less. In some cases, use less in an intelligent way, perhaps using less produce that was produced abroad and more local produce. But generally, I think an important theme is to simply buy less, drive less, be more mindful of how we use our resources and whether or not we actually have needs for these resources. And
okay, but to come back to his question and
yes.
to go a step further,
yes.
Half the world's population lives on less than $5 a day. So eat less, drive less, doesn't make sense for them.
Precisely. So this principle is obviously more heavily applied to those in the developed nations who are obviously using a lot more. They have a lot more room to perhaps shrink their footprint.
Okay. You wanted to add something?
Yes, thank you. One thing that I'm seeing from the conversation is that we believe we are the many, but we are the few. And so when you talk about the individual approach, what can you do as an individual, we don't have time for that. Because in 10 years or 12 years, the world will be uninhabitable.
So if you don't have the time, then who has to do it?
So obviously it takes one person to change the world.
Yeah.
But we can't just keep saying that we have to wait for individuals to play their part. We have to either inspire individuals, do things that inspire the communities, that inspire the world to actually take action. And last but not least, we do not have a conducive environment for an individual to dream. So we have to create a conducive environment for individuals to dream of a different future, of a different today.
So we have to dream about a different future, and that 1% can make a change. But how can that 1% make the change we want, whether it's a zero lifestyle or something else? Somebody? Yes, please.
Hi. I feel one of the most important principles that I think we are not focusing on is common but differentiated responsibilities. And I feel there's a lot of finger pointing on the global south where they could do this and do that. So I think it's time for them to develop nations to step up and have strong partnerships or collaborations with the developed nations where they can help them tackle this problem in that sense.
But if you are right that the developed countries probably made the problem, is it possible that the developed countries have the technologies to, and the capacity and the knowledge to help the South, or will the South have to find new solutions? What did you say?
Of course, I agree with you because, so I feel that the biggest argument is that for past few decades, the developed nations did everything that they wanted because there was no regulation. And now all of this responsibility cannot be put on shoulders of the global south. So which is, I feel, like it's a two-way street. I mean,
so the North has to take responsibility, and the South has to organize itself.
Yeah, of course.
Is there somebody else here that would like to come up with something on this issue? Or any issue that is relevant? Nobody here? I'll come to you, Delphine. Somebody else here? Yes?
That one? Yes, I think we need to take action through multi-stakeholder partnerships. So we need governments to really work with civil society to address this in a really holistic way together. So we started one called Transform Together, and we already have 3 governments working with us to help create sustainable smartphones and ICT to deal with the e-waste, to create jobs in India, thanks to introduction of new policies by the governments. So I think if we work together, we can solve this, and we've got to act fast and act big.
Yeah. And yes?
I would like to go back to your point that you were saying, does the North has the solutions? And usually we have seen to the North for the solutions, and we have seen North-South, exchange of knowledge, or South-South or North-North, but we usually don't see South-North exchange of knowledge. And I have seen a lot of very interesting solutions in the South. For example, communities in agroecology level in Latin America, Africa, India, that have come with very creative solutions that are not being accepted or implemented in the North. So I think it's really important, the approach. South-North also. We cannot depend.
Yes, I think we've had enough time to decide ourselves and make conscious choices, and apparently the majority of humanity doesn't make those conscious choices. So I think it's definitely a role of the state to make this choice for us, because we are talking about common goods.
So you're coming back to the state? And
definitely. There's a huge role of the state. I think citizens alone cannot do this. We have to need to take choices for us, because it's a huge problem.
The state with public goods?
I can only re-emphasize on what is being discussed, and in our individual role and capacity, we are leaders, and we have roles that we make every day, and so the decisions we make drive the consumption of other people, and so it's our responsibility to actually make that paradigm shift, that where we are driving other people that we are representing is the right way, and also to move our examples that we have from research and innovations to not only be examples and as light,
so we
but
have to live an example to life.
And not only as examples, but to actually become the reality. That we don't only point to them as good examples, but we make them the reality.
In relation to the global North and global South, let's be realistic. The global North, you dump your trash to the global South. For instance, look at electronic waste. You have a system of how you manage, we no longer say dispose, but since we have our own loopholes in the Basel Convention and even the Bamako Convention, so you've decided to take that loophole and dump your shit in the country.
Right. Okay, so let me come back to our panelists and start with you, Maria. You've heard them all talk about from the individual to the state responsibility. You've talked about civil society, local government, and we've talked about North-South issues. Do you feel like that there's something there that inspires you to respond? Short, 1 minute.
Sure. Not so much about the North and South, but regarding whether it's a state or a civil society issue, what I find is that the awareness of the citizens, at least from our point of view, from the air pollution point of view, the awareness of the citizens plays a key role. In many cities, especially for example, in Europe, we've seen that the citizens are putting pressure on the governments to go, for example, beyond the European limit values and target or aim for the WHO guidelines.
So if you're not aware, you cannot take action?
Yes, but at the same time, there are some things that cannot be, this kind of pressure cannot be acted on by the citizens. For example, for greenhouse gas reduction, this has to take more from a state point of view.
Yes.
So I think this should be a combination of both types of actors for the different types of problems.
And Adrian, would you like to add to that?
I don't know what to say. It's such a
No, you can pick any topic because we are really trying to mobilize the group to say what they feel is important. Yeah. Perhaps on North-South, you're at the World Food Programme.
Okay, so now in general, because I've been listening also to the previous sessions, I don't hear any solutions. It's nice, we should make policies and global South, global North, and blah, 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 this and this, but I mean, maybe it was yesterday.
Well, zero waste was a solution.
It's a concept. It's that we should have zero waste. But so how do we achieve that then? So I hope that we put enough, the same amount of investment like we do in this sort of conferences, in groupings of people that come with solutions or proposals for solutions or that can have investment to experiment. Because otherwise we will be here in 4 years again, and we discuss exactly the same thing, and we probably haven't even think a book, because the problems only increase. So my thing is, I don't hear from this audience and previous audience, I don't hear people that come up with ideas, solutions, different way of looking at things and whatever. Just bringing up the same things over and said, okay, zero waste is very interesting, but how do you achieve zero waste? And do you talk about zero waste in Holland or in Kibera?
I think we do have solutions.
Okay. I want to hear more than all those academic discussions.
All right.
I think we should have passed that because that's in the book.
Perfect. Birgit.
Yeah, I think that from my side, I hear a lot of good things because what I'm hearing from the audience and from here is that what we need is to shift the emphasis from reacting to anticipating. And if we anticipate by reducing the waste from source, at the individual level, at the, the community level, at the state level, it will work. And to do that, we need some policies. We have some regulation. We have some norms to follow. What we need is to push for this implementation of these policies, norms, and regulation. We have some technologies, which sometimes is not only from north, we have them from south also. If I take the case of wastewater, for example, we have a kind of segregation from source where you can segregate all the source and make it reusable. And we are like promoting seeing some waste as a kind of raw material where you can extract, eliminate the harmful substance and reuse it.
So what the challenge I get from your story is from how do we get from awareness to anticipatory policy and not reactive policy? And maybe we'll come back to that, but you have now got a challenge because he thinks that what you're saying is just a concept.
Well, I will invite you to come all over the world to visit the zero waste cities that we have, and you will see that it's much more than a concept. We have cities all over the world that are implementing zero waste strategies, so they are preventing waste by informing the population, they are segregating waste at source and collecting that, and in many cities you have more than 90% separate collection rate, so it means that you have almost no residual waste, so this is not a concept, and it happens not only in the Western world, but it also happens in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in India, and in those places what people notice is that they can do just so much at local level. They can prevent, they can reuse, they can recycle, and they can compost. But that means the residual waste that is left is the one that is poorly designed, that's the products that are poorly designed by the companies that are putting that on the market. So I really join Nicolas in his assessment that we need both national policies to prevent those products to be put on the market. We need national policies to have producers taking responsibility for their waste, and we need the producers to engage because they are the ones who can make the most impact. But people-powered solutions at the local level rather than capital-intensive solutions at the national level is the solution, and it's not a concept, it's happening, it's there. So I invite you to open your ears to the solutions that are actually out there.
But is it also not possible for the state to encourage people-powered solutions rather than capital-inspired solutions?
It is highly possible, and a lot of countries all over the world are talking to our activists at national and local level to develop regulatory frameworks that are enabling zero waste. Yeah. For example, banning incineration and encouraging prevention and recycling and composting, or banning products that are not good for people, that are harmful for environment, that you can't do anything. If you can't reuse it, recycle it, or compost it, you should not produce it and put it on the market.
So don't use what you cannot reuse.
So I think that there is a very important concept of the integrated waste management, which includes zero waste, includes planning, includes financial, includes legal framework, includes institutional framework, a big package with the invest pyramids of, it includes waste to energy and zero waste and all this. If we could implement this, it includes also planning and making a strategic and action plan and so on. So if you could do this and implement this, it is a very integrated and comprehensive approach to solve the problem of waste management. But the problem is that how can we implement this in the current socio-economic and environmental situation of the developing countries? This is the challenge.
So let me come back to that. There was a professor called I've forgotten his name right now, but anyway, Tariq Banouri, who once told me that if it takes $100 to build a well in Pakistan, it takes $1,000 for the government of Pakistan to build the same well, and maybe $40,000 if it is the World Bank that builds the well. So maybe it's actually not that expensive if you can mobilize local people.
This is included in the integrated solid waste management, local community and private sector and the government and the international community. All the stakeholders are included in the concept of integrated solid waste management.
All right. Thank you. Yes, at the back. There are two ladies.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think the key role here is of each and every individual government, especially through education policies, where solid waste management should be integrated into the education systems right from nursery, where there's separation. Children know how to go about it and how to make best out of the waste. With that, we can go a long way, and we don't blame the North for all that, but we come up with our own individual solutions and partner with the globe.
Okay, thank you. And the next person?
All right, thank you. I would just like to also emphasize, my colleague who has just been speaking about that, it comes from the mindset also. It's not all to do with resources. We can actually change the mindset. We have good policies, but when it comes to implementation, there's nothing. And it's not all about having so much work to do, so much paperwork, but also the groundwork. So it's needed that we have also financial resources, also from the developing countries, from the developed countries, to assist those that are still developing.
All right. And do we have any more people around here who would like to say something? Yes.
I would like to go with the point you made about Pakistan, and there is I'm from Pakistan, and I have so much evidence which says that local solutions are far more better than buying foreign solutions and trying to localize them in your country. For example, in Punjab and other areas in Pakistan, they've tried to buy solid waste management systems from Turkey, and they're paying so much money to sustain them. However, people within the country are far more capable of creating a localized solution. So stop paying these other people and start building up people from the grassroots level.
All right, and there was, I'm looking for new speakers.
There was a great panel yesterday that was here talking about trying to reframe environmental issues as human rights issues, and I think that is a good framework to work off that both incorporates grassroots, like local level solutions, as well as the role of the state, which has an obligation to respect the human rights of its citizens. And I think, furthermore, like this dichotomy of the North and the South kind of oversimplifies the actual relationships that happen within the areas that we're calling the global South. And there are like a variety of polluters that are coming both from the North. There are a lot of pollutants that are coming from the North, but also there are a lot of power systems within what we are calling the global South that are contributing and failing a lot of the people that are living in these areas. So I think reframing these as human rights issues and looking specifically how those rights are violated by in each situation is very important, as opposed to.
But maybe that's a little challenging. Let's take the human right to water and sanitation. It's basically a right to about 20 to 40 liters of water. So it's marginal. So what you actually need is the entire legal system where you don't want any harm to be you don't want to be experiencing any harm from somebody else, which is more than a human rights approach. So I would go beyond what you're saying and saying expand the human rights approach to use the whole infrastructure of law to try to put those who are responsible for the problems to do it. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, I would agree with that, but also just in the way that we're conceptualizing these environmental issues, it's not it is for the collective, but also we have to recognize that a lot of these environmental issues do disproportionately affect people on the lower income end of any given society. So that's important in any local region as well as the entire legal framework.
So do you think that the human rights approach is going to help with the waste management system?
I think it will help. It can contribute. But not solve all the things. Because what I'm seeing, we have really like good policies. We had all the conventions. And many countries have kind of a contracted party of these conventions. We have our national laws and regulation. If those were only implemented, let's say 40% implemented, I think it will even reduce the problem and the impact we are seeing now. So it's why I'm saying we cannot negligent saying that human rights couldn't be or can't be a solution, but it's maybe part of the solution, and we have other levers also which we have to lift up. We have really to implement the policies we have.
But let me come back to the point that she raises. She says that if you were able to implement 40% of the treaties that we have, then maybe we make a huge step forward. So who is preventing this implementation? Is it people who don't want to listen to the laws? Is it the industry who doesn't want to listen to the laws? Who's causing the problems over here?
I would suggest the industry, because when it comes to redesigning for us to be able to have better products that are easy for dismantling, sorry for using that word, they don't want to make them because it's more expensive, so there's no ROI on their end. So every other time, they will tend to do the lobby for people, for governments not to implement that. So the industry and capitalism is the cause.
So Adrian said earlier that we want to buy cheap food and the companies want to sell us a lot of food. And it's also because we want cheap food. So is there a reaction to that? Is it because of the way we behave as consumers, cheap food? No?
No, I think we're taking the problem the other way around. Like, in most cases, the way we consume has been designed by the multinationals and the way they want us to buy products and what they want us to buy. So we're buying cheap food because we're sold cheap food, and if you see the advertisements on TV all over the world, it's not for healthy products. It's only for very, sorry for the word, crappy food or crappy products.
Okay.
And so we are in a system where we blame the consumer while actually the consumer is behaving exactly how the multinationals have decided it should behave to continue endorsing their business model.
Sarah?
Hi, I'd like to bring up the equity issue here and the inequality issue, because certainly when we have extremes of wealth and poverty, we have poor people who are struggling to survive and they don't have the means to take these steps, And then we have people who are extremely wealthy who have the means to buy their way out of any local problems that they see or environmental issues. And so the balance of those, if that were addressed a bit more, we could solve some of these problems.
So basically what you're saying is if we could address inequality to some extent, then maybe we can address the overconsumption of the rich people, whether they're in the north or the south, and maybe we can to some extent help to meet the needs of the poor people. But let's come back to you guys about the role of the multinational. Is the energy multinational causing the big footprint on energy issue? Is it the food multinationals that are creating major challenges in the world? And is it the waste multinationals that are causing problems? Or are they very much part of the solution?
I don't know so much about the energy multinationals, but the transport multinationals do have a major role, especially well, in the north. No, I don't know. But they do have a major role. And we are, in a way, in a model of society where we are driven to use, in this case, this kind of product like cars and this kind of personal vehicles. But I do believe that the consumer has a role in there in changing. It's not because they sell us a big car. It's in our hands to decide, well, maybe I don't want a big car anymore, or I want to consume in a different way.
Okay.
It won't have an immediate impact on a large scale, but I think that's the way to start.
Adrian?
Well, of course, they are very much part of the food system, looking from a food system perspective. The industry is part of it, the state is part of it, the individuals are part of it. And just saying we have to do away with the industry, then we wouldn't be here, no? And capitalism, I'm not so sure about the other system, didn't produce less pollution, by the way. So it's easy to throw that out, but of course the multinationals, the industry are part of the problem, part of the solutions. But not only them, but, you know.
Now, I think that we cannot, as I said, point a finger to say that these are the people who are causing the problem, because it starts with us. We have a choice, we have a product out there, and I think if we are conscious and we are aware of the impact of our lifestyle, I can choose to walk to bike, or I could, this
okay.
is, I didn't, let me just say that we need really to move from like working together on the sustainable production from the source. This will involve the big companies and the private sector, the business company who is producing. If they are aware and they make a choice of sustainable production, and we as a consumer make also the way of sustainable consumption.
Okay.
So then we can meet
in the middle. All right, Adrian, about food waste, is it easy to solve?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I have to say how.
Oh, yeah, of course. Solutions.
Okay, food waste, we have to, because you have the waste in the terms like, you know, this tomato doesn't look so good anymore, so I chuck it off. Or you have to waste in hospitals, restaurants, that they get the plates back and they don't know what to do with it, so they chuck it away. But we have also the loss in the supply chain, especially in this part of the world, which is the waste, as I just described, is a much bigger problem in France, for example, than it's in Kenya.
Yeah.
So I agree with her. I said, okay, there should be individual awareness, should be policies, regulations, sanctions, punishment, or whatever, to make it worthwhile for the individual, for the resident, for the hospital to do something about that. But if we then look at the loss, what I call the loss, that is in France, for example, very little loss between the production and the consumer.
So in the supermarkets, it doesn't get lost?
Sorry?
In the supermarkets, it doesn't get lost?
In the supermarket, yes. But from the point where it's produced, let's say agriculture production, up to the retail, the supermarket, etc., is very little. So the focus should be there on waste. And they do that. I see it. Fantastic. Here, we should have much more focus on the loss, because here the biggest part is lost between the producer, the farmer, and where eventually where it ends up in the wholesale or in the retail. So the solutions are different for, let's say, East Africa than for Western Europe.
Agreed. But the gentleman from Pakistan said that maybe we have our own solutions in our own villages, and so maybe in Africa they should not build up that whole system all the way to the supermarkets. Maybe they should do something completely different.
Well, I think that's a very nice idea, but I don't think with the current system of agriculture, I don't think that will work. With the new system, yes, but you didn't let me finish the first time. I just wanted to come to that point. With the current system, the horizontal agriculture, it won't work. We still need a lot of land that becomes less and less arable, and the consumers are all going to the cities. Someone said it this morning, the urbanization. I said, with that system, this will not work. So we need to look at totally different way of how do we produce food, because we need more and better food, and how do we get that to the consumer? Can we make that distance shorter, what they suggested actually, so we don't waste a lot in transport, building very expensive roads? Why do we need roads if we don't need trucks? Yeah? Mm-hmm. So partly said, with the current system as we're doing now, we are heading for the cliff. That's in the book. So we need to go back and say, we have to change the concept of agriculture, maybe also other things, but I'm from World Food Programme, I'm talking about the agriculture. Mm. I said, we have to change it. And we see in the world it's changing. In New Zealand, in Singapore, in Holland. You know what they do? They get the water from the sky. Here it's 40%. 40% of this air is water. There is more water in the sky than in the land. We should forget about the land. Well, not forget about the land. But we focus on land. We have to focus on the sky. The water can be from the sky. If we start farming in this direction rather than in that direction, you might be able to farm much closer to the consumer, so you don't have all this very expensive, emission-rich transport, etc. And that is a bit to the idea of the speaker there. But we have to change the concept, how we produce food and how we transport that to the consumer.
All right, thank you. We have a few more minutes, I think, so we have a few more questions. Yes, please.
So I feel that everyone focuses on regulation so much, but I think sometimes regulation, there's no need for it in some cases, and there's creative compliance. So in Kenya, you cannot import e-waste, for example. So this is a demotivator for people to invest in e-waste management systems. So I visited one of the plants where they manage e-waste, and turns out there are NGO also who import a lot of computers. And those computers become waste in 6 months, and they're processed there. And all the valuable precious metals, they can't be processed here. So they are sent back. And this whole system is used as a free sorting facility for the North. And this, again, perpetuates this inequality. And second thing is that how we measure improvement of countries on this index needs to change. Because countries just outsource their pollution-producing activities to different countries, and then point fingers. So that's all.
So people are moving their pollution to other parts of the world. Yes, Sarah?
I'd just like to point out that one of the main messages of the GEO6 report is the need for systemic change, so that all of these issues are interconnected and can't be dealt with individually. Really urgent, systemic, transformative are the words, right?
Yes?
Yes, I definitely think the government needs to raise taxes on the products that pollute the environment. This is the thing to begin with, because yeah, only then the businesses will change accordingly and will adapt automatically on more sustainable products.
Yeah.
I think, summarizing, I think information and education is needed so that people together can support, lobby, introduce, and push for policies that adjust prices and compensation to reflect the actual environmental and social costs and benefits of products, services, and behavior. So packaged, unhealthy food that harm other people should be more expensive, and consuming less should be more beneficial, and consuming unpackaged, healthy food should be less expensive.
All right. So we've had a whole lot of people and brilliant experts over here, and we've all been talking about the various ways to deal with the energy waste, with the food system, as well as with the waste system. And essentially, I guess you all were talking in some ways about the circular economy, using less and trying to circulate everything to the extent possible. You were also talking about that there are solutions all over the place and we need a different food system. And you were talking about also the role of transport in also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And most of you had some views about whether it's the state that should take action, business, individuals, or anybody else. But you came up and said it's only that 1%, and that 1% has to make the difference, which means each of us has to not only go into a zero waste lifestyle ourselves, but also try to see if we can mobilize other people to change. Otherwise, that 1% will not have the impact that he was suggesting. Thank you all very much, and I wish you all a wonderful time here in Kenya and a successful period beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't manage to let you all.
No, no.
Thank you very much, Joyita. I have to take my co-chair to the press office because we will actually be doing the launch of the report in a few minutes. So hopefully we'll see you over there as well.